Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a very interesting day, so I have a lot of slides. I'm not going to go through all of them. I can promise you I got a bit eager yesterday when I started with this. I have a lot to share with you. But I think being here today, some of the topics have already been covered. And from the last few discussions here, I think it's important as well to get to the end of the presentation, because we have had some interesting surveys in Norway about this. I'm from Norway. I'm going to speak English to be sure that we all can connect properly. I will start. I was asked by Danish Oil and Gas to start with the discussions going on in Norway at the moment. We just had an election like a week ago. And there has been, of course, a lot of discussion about how important is the oil industry for Norway at the moment and how should we go in the future. So I will start a bit with some of the discussion we had. Then I will move into some of the questions which have been raised earlier here today. And then I will end with a few comments about how to recruit. So let's see. We start here. The oil price collapse was, of course, a vicious awakening of how dependent we have been on oil. Especially for the since 2003 and up till 2014. I think both Norway and Denmark have had an unfortunate situation. Our oil production has declined, while prices have more than compensated for the decline in the volumes. So, of course, that's given us a big income. The income has been growing, and of course that has given us a very nice situation. So exactly this, I think, with the sharp fall in oil prices, that had to come at one moment. And I don't agree with everything the first speaker said today, but I do agree that the uncertainty of the future of the oil prices is a challenge. You're used to this challenge, and it doesn't seem that this challenge is going to be any smaller in the future. So I think at some moment we had to face the fact that oil prices could fall, and of course that will give a completely different situation for the income to our countries. So what has the discussions been? Well, I think after the collapse in oil prices, there got lots of panic, of course. People have been fired in the industry, and of course that started to ask questions about how important, or not at least, how dependent should we be on the oil and gas sector in the future. Do we need to build new industries next to the oil and gas sector so we have more than one leg to stand on? And this is, you probably know this, because this is the income to the Danish economy from the oil sector. But of course, this is a challenge. How do we go, and how can we actually use the technology? How can we use what we've learned from the oil industry to also build new industries going forward? We have a big problem in Norway because we've gone used to actually the income from the oil sector. I guess some of you know what this number is. It is a big number. It is, of course, the Norwegian Oil Fund. So now to start thinking differently, that we're not going to have as much money coming from the oil sector and into the Norwegian economy is something which is difficult to grasp. It's difficult to get into this new way of thinking. Because in that kind of sense, we must say we have been lucky with oil prices increasing for more than 10 years. Of course, that has been a lucky period. So we need to have more money coming into this fund, or we need to have more money to stand on. We have a growing population. We have more elderly coming into the society. So this fund is basically set to cover the pension payments in the future. And it looks quite big now, but I can tell you it's not enough to cover the pension payments in the future. So we need to see how we could use this money properly to grow new industries and get the most out of the oil and gas sector. So this has been one of the hottest discussions in the campaigns now before the election in Norway. On one side, you have the oil industry that has been wanted to grow the industry. On the other side, you have the green movement, which want to close down everything now. And it has been not a very fruitful discussion because it's been so polarized that you don't get any further. On one side, you want to open all the new areas in Norway. On the other side, you want to close down everything in almost overnight. Of course, none of this is going to happen, I think. And that is one part I do not agree with the first speaker today, because I think it's much more uncertainty about the future oil demand. I think we will reach a peak. But as a financial, or representing the financial sector, I think we have learned some lessons after the financial crisis as well. Because it doesn't matter if you think that the oil prices are going up and down or the demand is going to reach a peak. I think the most important is to calculate the risk. And that is something we learned from the financial crisis, that before the financial crisis, we used to cover the risk with a high probability, which could actually hit the income very hard. So high probability and high impact. After the financial crisis, we learned that we should also consider events that could have an impact, or which could have a big impact with a low probability. So that's why I think that, believe it or not, we might reach a peak in oil demand not very far from now, but at least we need to consider the risk, because that's important to get. That's important to have a stable economy and also for the companies. So these have been the major discussions in Norway at the moment before the election campaign. But now I'm going to talk a bit about what can we compare? What do we have or what kind of development do we have had in the Norwegian oil and gas sector, which I think is more the same discussions you have here. So I'm not going to go through the whole, this report, but I've read it before I came here, and I think I'm going to touch upon some of the areas which the minister also raised. So I think I'll skip this one. I think it's probably quite obvious. But I think one thing this sector has not been good enough at is to show actually how good you are at being innovative. Because these are some of the technical and, I think, very sexy solutions. Being the world leader or build these kind of, these kind of solutions, I think you're in the lead. And you have to show that to the world. You have to show this, because it is very interesting and it is triggering to see these kind of pictures. What has been very important is, of course, to end up in this, being the world leader in this kind of technology or offshore technology, is, of course, that the Norwegian continental shelf has served as a technology laboratory with the development of innovative solutions as a result. So being able to take a bit of risk, being innovative, being trying and testing new solutions has actually made us a world leader on this. And this is something I think is easier to sell. I think it's also a good thing to sell to recruiting new people. And I also think this is the way to go in the future. We need to still be the best of finding these technical solutions, because that's important to get down costs, but also be in the lead as a sector and an energy producer in the future. Yeah, I'm not going to say very much about this, but this is how the development of the technology is organized in Norway. What is important with this is that it's organized in different sectors and is a cooperation not only from the ministry, but you can actually, I've been sitting in one of the boards, so I know this system quite well. For example, the Petromax, they will invite companies together with the research institution to come with common bids to get research money to develop new technology. And I think the cooperation between the research base and the companies is very important to get the best solutions. Because sometimes if you just leave the researchers by themselves, or you leave the companies by themselves, you don't get the best solutions. They're getting separate, and it's not easy to get them applied, the more research-based solutions applied to the companies. So One of the areas I think where we could actually have a lot to gain is in the enhanced oil recovery. Actually, this is the technical potential. But 7% increasing the rate or the amount of oil you can actually get up from a well. And I think this is very important in Denmark because you have an area where you have produced oil for a long time. Often the big companies do not want to touch the smaller or the tail parts or the tail production. That's often more smaller companies who want to do. And I think also, to get to use the more time-dependent infrastructure, it's important to get as much out of the ground as possible. Also because it's a bit uncertainty about how many new projects and new installation and new infrastructure you want to invest in, it's important then to get most out of the areas we're producing today. So I think this is an important solution actually to get down the costs. And it's quite, if you look at the potential of income earnings from this, approximately 130 billion Danish kroners is the 7%. Of course, this is a technical potential. It doesn't say that you could produce all of it. But there are economic solutions to this as well, getting down costs. This could be very interesting. This is also one part that I think we haven't been focusing enough on, how to sell this. Because if you read this, that the industry's competitiveness and innovation capacity have led to major positive spin-off effects and technological application in other industries in Norway. Just to show you how important that is. Because now we have a downturn in this industry, but also how to sell this to the new generation. That you're not stuck in one sector, even if you start there, and not at least how important it is to use the technology, to use what we've learned from this sector to build new industries. Working together, I think it's a very good thing in the future to look at the society and the benefits from the society. And just to show you what some of the solutions which have come out of the oil and the gas sector in Norway, new industries where we can build on. Because these are some of the industries that have actually used some of your technology to build new industries. And I think many of these are very interesting also for the future. So I think being able to transfer this technology and sell that will have a big importance for the industry in the future. And cooperation among, in the whole chain. To get down cost, the cooperation is very important. Also to get the right technology out is very important. But I think what we have in Norway is not only that, to use especially the infrastructure, because that's time dependent. Especially some of it. If you don't want to give for a new and very big investments, you have some kind of time limits on the infrastructure. And then being able to cooperate across the licensees is very important. In Norway, it's not only that a choice to work together across the licensees. Actually, it says that licensees have a duty to seek agreement in cases where coordination of deposits is clearly rational. So it's actually a duty to do this. And this is important because if you look at the total, working together with some of your competitors could actually benefit the society as such. So this kind of regulation is very important to use the framework and infrastructure as efficient as possible. I think we're going to skip most of this, but I tell you, especially the licensing program has been very important to actually get also smaller competitors into the market. Area fees has been important to actually get started some of the projects where you have had discoveries to push to push the time horizons from actually made the discovery to the production start. You have these fees to push the companies to get started more or sooner. So these kind of regulations and this kind of legacy could help out getting the oil out of the ground faster, and especially now when we still see a lot of demand for it. So the tax system has been very important. I think especially the reimbursement system is important as well. To being successful to get more and smaller companies in. As I said earlier, large companies are more or less covering the bigger plays and the bigger wells. I think it's important also to use most of the resources and being able to produce the smaller wells. You need also smaller companies in. And we have seen earlier history in Norway as well, having too few companies does not give the right competition, enough competition I would also say, to be able to develop the right technology and also to get down cost. So by using the licensing system, but also the taxation system has been very helpful. And I think one important one is the reimbursement system, where actually you could have for companies, because the smaller companies usually don't have an income stream. Usually if you need to cover your cost, it takes the time before you actually start drilling until you can see the income stream coming. On the Norwegian continental shelf, it's around 10 years from the start of the project to the money is coming in. Of course, in the period of time then, you can usually carry forward some of the losses or the losses from the start of the project. And that helps if you do have some income coming in, pushing it forward. But to help smaller companies coming into this sector, we've actually had this reimbursement system, which actually means that you can have an immediate refund of the tax value of the exploration cost. So you can actually choose to get an immediate refund of this money, and that has helped, in my opinion, smaller companies and to increase competition on the sector, which is very good for technology development and cost. There has been a bit of discussion recently about how should we keep this system? Is it unfair compared to other energy sources? But I still think this is a system which has been efficient for the purpose of developing the smaller and tail ends of the area. And I don't think, at least for the next 4 years, this is going to change. We skip this one. Also, get the cost down. Some of the costs have come down, some of them 50%. That's the investment cost, and operating costs so far have fallen by 27%. Showing this means that, yes, the costs have come down, but that doesn't mean that the cost will stay down for ages. So it is very important now that we don't have only the cyclical cost going down, because they will for sure come up again. It's very important now to use the time, even if oil prices get up, to be sure that you have a competitive model which you could actually assure you the competitive position in the longer run. And to get that, I think it's important to establish more cooperation between the oil companies and the oil service industry, and also across different sectors. Maybe also sometimes compete with your competitors, because we do have the same challenge here. The Danish or the Norwegian continental shelf will not be the cheapest place to produce oil in the world, so we need to be competitive with the other medium cost producers, and cooperation could be one thing. We started with this. I think one thing we've been focusing a lot on the Norwegian continental shelf is to cut the CO2 emissions. And focusing on carbon capture and storage is something we started this testing a few years ago, trying to develop this technology. We got some steps ahead, and then it stopped for a while. We call it a moon landing. We didn't really land on the moon, or we haven't landed yet. We have started again. I think this is important also for to being competitive in the future. focusing on carbon, focusing on climate changes is important. So reducing the emissions from this sector is important from Denmark, but also for the different companies. There are also here a couple of examples of how to use the CO2 and to get to production even, or I wouldn't say cleaner, but at least cut the emissions from the sector. And one thing is to use the CO2 to inject it in the wells, and the other one is to use floating wind to stabilize the wells as well. So at the very end here, I want to make a few comments about this as well, because this has been exactly the same problem in Norway, and just to continue the debate you had here, because there was actually the Norwegian Oil and Gas put together a little group of 5 students who were supposed for 1 year to work, actually to go and ask all the questions they found necessary to know. In that kind of because what they wanted to know is to learn more about this generation here, the millennials, which will be the next ones to recruit into the sector. How do they think? How do you actually communicate with them to get them into the industry? They've been working now for 1 year, and they have actually presented their results. I would say the results are quite good and bad. I think you touched upon some of them. I just wanted to comment on a few of the results they said. Because actually, and it has been said here before today, but actually it will be a bit challenging to convince them actually to go into the oil and gas sector. Because out of this round, they found that this generation, first of all, they don't look at the oil and gas industry as part of the solution. They look at it as part of the problem. And the reason why, I mean, all of we're born and raised in the area of the oil, so the oil era. But the next generations, they are born in the climate era. They think differently. So that was the first statement. Why should we work for oil and gas sector as we're seeing being part of the problem and not part of the solution? So I think also then to be able to show what you're doing within technology transfer, but also how you could be part of developing the green future is very, very important in this setting. Also, it was very interesting to hear them how to communicate with them. Because as they're saying, they are the millennials, they're also Generation Z. And they said that, you know, we are the top 2 levels of the Maslow hierarchy. We don't, you know, we have most of what we need. So you need to sell to us what we should learn from you, why we should find it interesting for us to be in your sector, not the other way around. I mean, most of us we used to go to a job interview and please give us a job. But they are much more the other way around. Why should we work for you? Please tell me. And this kind of communication is very important. They also said that we don't want you to tell us what to do. We want to be part of the discussion. We want to take part of the discussion how to work together. And I think, actually, maybe I should recommend you to talk to this group, invite them to Denmark and tell about their outcome of this study. But they also learned, because there were some card games here, they also wasn't aware of how much money and how important this industry was for the Norwegian economy. So they had something to learn from this, and we need to learn from this how to communicate how important the industry is. So at the very end here, I'm a bit puzzled sometimes. I work for the financial industry. You know, you think you have a problem. I can promise you we have a problem, at least the employees in the financial sector. Because the estimate for how this sector will look in the future, it says like approximately 50% of the jobs will be gone within 10 years. Why? Because we will be substituted by a robot. And I think, you know, yes, we need new workers in the future. But I think, you know, seeing the development on IT technology and also robotization means that a lot of jobs can be moved onshore, making it probably more easy as well to get more younger people to work there because you have a different view of the sector. And also women. That was also some of the millennium generation said that it's difficult to find role models when all the pictures we see or the photos we see from the industry are all men in black suits. So The very, very last point I want to make is the future. I mean, the debate has been very much, as I told you, on polarized. This is the electric car sales in Norway and Denmark. It's a big difference. Why I brought this is because I think you have the same debate here or the same challenge here. Because in Norway we have one ministry for oil and energy, and we have one ministry for climate. And in my opinion, at least, they're moving parallel, not together. And to actually sell the mission to the audience, to the Danish, population, to understand where the Danish society is going, that we're going to reach both these goals. These two sectors need to, or these two areas need to cooperate. We need one way, not two roads to walk on. And I think that then it will be easier to grasp the need for oil and energy in the future, but also that there is a transition period where we're going in the further end to a greener economy. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I spent too much time here.
Thank you very much, Tina Margrethe. Would you like a seat? Yeah. And we'll see if there may be a quick question from the audience.
Sure.
Just let me know. Well, anyway, I have a question. I mean, it's just out of curiosity. What can you buy being a welfare state for that amount of money in that oil fund? In other words, how long time will that amount of money benefit Norway?
Of course, it's a big help because it's not actually called the oil fund. It's called the pension fund. So it's going to it's going to pay for the pension payments in the foreseeable or a long term going forward. But we could see actually a peak, where we actually see a peak in these payments, because it's not big enough to cover, the growing elderly population in Norway for that many years. So even in my generation, we need to have, have a pension plan. Next to this pension fund, because it will not at all cover the pension payments which the Norwegian state has to do in the future.
Okay, but for how long will it contribute to?
Oh, for very, very long time. But the amount will get smaller and smaller. Okay. Because some politicians like to look at it as like, it's 7,800 billions of kroners. And if you split it on, the population in Norway, we have approximately 1.5 million each. It's not that they give you this money, and I think it's very good they don't, because it was spent straight away. But I think, when you're starting to look at the future, it's a good safety to have this.
Well, it surely would be in any household. Well, but you spoke here finally on the youngsters and their attitude to the oil and gas sector, but has this tremendous amount of money meant that they have a different perspective on the oil and gas sector in Norway? In other words, regard it more interesting or more sexy, if you want to use that word?
I think it's the same as here. When I've read or heard the discussions here, when I read in the newspapers here, it's the same, because not very many people actually know what they do in the sector. It has been quite closed in a way. We know that you have a platform very, very far out from land, and then, people even don't know how important oil is for, your everyday life. You know what you put on your car, and that's, of course, the most important part. But, that is used in plastic, that is used in very many things of what we're using every day. People don't know. So I think awareness of actually what we use oil for, how difficult it is to replace it in some sectors. So we need a bit more oil and gas in the future, or we're dependent on that, and not at least the income, where it's come from, to show actually how big part of the contribution to the welfare state we have today, oil and gas industry has been. And then, of course, it's impossible to say how that will look in the future, but it will have a declining impact on the Norwegian economy. But to show that this is what we have done, we should be very proud of that, and how we could use this technology and basically learning from how we built this industry and how we can grow new industries as well.
Tina Margrethe Saltvedt, thank you very much for sharing your views.